Iraq announces its new prime minister, an inexperienced politician from a wealthy family.
He is an oligarch, a businessman that has entered public life out of the blue.
I'm Marco Werman.
And I'm Carolyn Beeler. Today, what's at stake for Iraq as Ali al-Zaidi assumes leadership. We also get an update on the new supreme leader of Iran.
We've not heard his voice. We've not seen an image of him. We've not seen a video. There is simply no sign of life.
Plus, a musician celebrates a folk instrument from Puerto Rico.
A lot of people would think of this instrument as being for the elders and for the people in the countryside. I started playing when I was 6, and being a young player was not common.
And a duck's eye view from the base camp of Mount Everest.
All that and more today here on The World. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman.
And I'm Carolyn Beeler. Hungary's next prime minister is a man in a hurry. Péter Magyar takes office next month, and he's been busy this week meeting with top European officials in Brussels. His goal is clear: secure funding to restore the rule of law in Hungary after decades of authoritarian leadership. Funds have been withheld over concerns about corruption and backsliding on democracy.
Magyar has promised Hungarian voters that he will unlock those funds, but he's got to convince Brussels that he can change things. The World's Europe correspondent Orla Barry brings us a look at the first steps the new government is taking to deliver on that.
Péter Magyar arrived in Brussels to a sea of photographers and TV cameras. The 45-year-old posed for photos with Ursula von der Leyen, the EU Commission chief, but they didn't take any questions. And later, he posted a video on Facebook.
Én azt gondolom, hogy mind a két találkozó nagyon sikeres volt, konstruktív volt.
The meetings were very successful and constructive, he said. EU resources will soon be coming to Hungary. The EU is understood to have presented Magyar with 27 conditions, mostly to do with restoring the rule of law in Hungary, measures like ending corruption and bringing back an independent judiciary.
I think it's possible, but it will take years. That's for sure.
Adrian Latzo was a judge in Hungary for more than 2 decades. Under Orban, the judicial system didn't change all of a sudden, she says. It was gradual. Those who supported Orban started to get promoted, while cases involving members of Orban's Fidesz party would just disappear.
The most sensitive cases don't get to court at all, especially in the criminal department where I used to work. It's simply that the cases of Fidesz politicians somehow never got to court. It was stopped during the prosecution phase.
In late 2024, Latzo hit breaking point. She put a post on Facebook saying she'd no choice but to resign from her job.
It was a very, very hard choice for me because this really was my dream job. I have never wanted anything else. But the system I joined in 2001 was completely different.
Latzo is hopeful Magyar will bring that old system back. In the last few weeks, he has called on Hungary's top judges, including the head of the Supreme Court, an Orban appointee, to step down. And if they refuse, Magyar's new government could force their resignations.
The Hungarian government will have 2/3 majority in the Hungarian parliament. So formally, yes, they can change any law they'd like to.
Marta Pardavi is with the Hungarian Helsinki Committee, a human rights organisation in Budapest. That parliamentary majority gives his government unlimited opportunities, she says.
But it also is, of course, something to watch, and there should be institutional safeguards, rails put in place so that this huge political opportunity is not abused.
We don't want another Orban, she says. Still, Magyar is under pressure to act fast.
From the point of view of the Hungarian government, time is of the essence because they might lose access to about 10 billion euro in funding because of different deadlines.
Laurent Pesch is a law professor at University College Dublin. One source of EU funding, worth more than 10 billion euros, close to $12 billion, expires by the end of August. Pesch says right now the EU is on Magyar's side, so that deadline may be extended. But he'll have to show concrete proof before then, Pesch says, that reform is underway. Some in Budapest say there are already some signs of change.
We can feel that the mood is changing in the media.
András Foldas is an independent journalist and director of a new film, 80 Angry Journalists. The vast majority of Hungary's public and private media outlets were controlled by Orbán and his allies. And Foldas's new film tells the story of one of Hungary's once independent news websites, Index, that gradually came under Viktor Orbán's control.
Hungary's most popular news site, index.hu.
Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who once branded it a fake news factory.
Index was the last one standing.
Editor-in-chief was fired.
After its editor-in-chief was sacked in 2020, journalists revolted. 80 of them resigned en masse and set up their own independent news site called Telex, which still operates today. But it wasn't easy, Foldas says, competing with pro-Orbán outlets that were backed by state advertising or oligarchs' money. In the last few days, some journalists working for those pro-Orbán outlets have started to speak out.
Journalists of the public media wrote open letters how difficult it was for them to work under such a repressive regime. So we can see signs that things might change, but we are in an interim period now.
Péter Magyar has vowed to restore the public service role of state media once he takes office on May 9th. Foldas says he's holding his breath to see if the incoming Prime Minister will stick by that promise. For The World, I'm Orla Barry.
After a political impasse that lasted for months, Iraq announced its new prime minister on Monday. Ali al-Zaidi is a 40-year-old millionaire businessman and a political outsider. His thin political profile raises a lot of questions about how he will lead a country still recovering from its own war now that a new war in Iran is shaking the region. Hamza Hoded is an Iraqi political analyst and fellow with the Center for New American Security in Washington.
Ali al-Zaidi is a businessman. He's basically what you can call an Iraqi oligarch. He's affiliated with a private bank. His family owns a satellite television channel in Iraq, amongst many other businesses. And for most Iraqis, they might have heard of his bank. They've definitely heard of his television channel. But as of April 27th, they now know who he is because he was tasked by Iraq's president to form the next government.
Yeah, and why has he been named prime minister? Because, as I said, a lot of people see him as a compromise candidate.
That's correct. So Iraq has a parliamentary republic. It has parliamentary elections every 4 years. And the last one that Iraq had was on November 11, 2025. And there was no clear winner that won in that election. And so the parties have to come and form coalitions to form a government. And it was so fragmented, there was no clear winner. And so they had to choose a compromise candidate. And that's been the norm in Iraq since they've started to have free and fair elections since 2005. But what makes this one different and shocking to the people was that this compromise candidate wasn't from the political establishment. He didn't run in the elections and win a seat in parliament. He is an oligarch, a businessman that has entered the public life out of the blue.
Hadn't Nouri al-Maliki, the prime minister, been tapped to be the candidate?
So Nouri al-Maliki was prime minister for 2 terms from 2006 to 2014. And he's been running in elections since then. And while his party wins a number of seats, he has never been able to become prime minister again. I'm sure if you ask Maliki, he would probably tell you that he didn't expect himself to really be nominated. I think it was just part of the political negotiations to move things forward. But what made it more prominent was that President Donald Trump posted on Truth Social publicly rejecting Maliki's nomination, basically vetoing him. And it is quite known when it comes to Iraqi politics that there is foreign influence on the government formation, but it's never outright public acknowledgement like we saw from President Trump. And I think that's what made Maliki's nomination and rejection more prominent in the news.
So we also need to recognize that Iraq shares a long border and complicated history with Iran. What role has Iraq played so far in the Iran war? How has it positioned itself?
So prior to the killing of Iran's supreme leader on February 28th, Iraq has done quite well in preventing itself from being dragged in the regional war since October 2023. But the recent violence that took place was too close to home, and we started to see armed groups in Iraq become involved in that war. So we started seeing attacks on US presence, whether that's the largest embassy in the world in Baghdad, or whether that's foreign US troops stationed in Iraq as part of the foreign coalition that's helping the Iraqi government fight ISIS. And so the levels of tension grew. There was a lot of fear amongst both politicians and the public that Iraq might get dragged further into this conflict. But thankfully, the ceasefire did help ease some tensions in Iraq.
Yeah, do we have any sense how al-Zaidi is expected to respond to what's happening in Iran right now?
Unfortunately not, because there's nothing about him or his background that gives you that sense of what he would be like. That's part of the problem of someone not partaking in politics, not running in elections, being nominated. Now, we could claim he's affiliated or has relations with certain political parties, and you might be able to connect some of the dots. But I think it's such a complicated matter that we simply don't know enough until he is in office.
So back to the reports that Iraq's former Prime Minister, Nouri al-Maliki, who has been seen as pro-Iran, was forced to drop out as a candidate for the premiership because of U.S. opposition and Trump's post on Truth Social. How much influence does the U.S. maintain in Iraq's politics today?
The U.S. maintains a lot of influence in Iraq. Part of that has to be with Iraq's foreign reserves being in New York, for example. Iraq's majority of its federal budget comes through oil sales. Oil sold in U.S. dollars. Iraq's U.S. dollars goes into its foreign reserve account in New York. So there's a lot of economic influence that the United States has on Iraq, as well as Iraq being one of many countries in the Middle East, which is a region that the United States continues to have a lot of influence over.
So how does that compare to the influence of neighboring Iran on Iraq?
Well, that's the other side of the balancing act Iraq tends to have to play within its foreign policy. It's between Iran and the United States. On the other hand, you've got Iran, which is not a world superpower, but it's a regional power. Iraq's largest border is with Iran. It shares cultural ties, both religiously and historically. And so they too have a lot of influence on Iraqi politics.
Why would Donald Trump like someone such as Ali al-Zaidi? Because it sounds like he almost had to pass a White House audition. Am I overstating that?
With regards to al-Zaidi, the United States hasn't come out and publicly vetoed him like they did with Maliki, which I have to emphasize is not the norm. Like I said, usually these things are done behind closed doors. And so it's not quite clear that the United States has really given their stamp of approval. The U.S. Embassy in Baghdad put out a statement wishing him good luck because, like I said, he still has to form his government. He's not formally prime minister just yet. But that doesn't mean relations are going to be warm. That doesn't mean he's not going to face a lot of pressure, whether that's financially or with security matters that any Iraqi prime minister has to deal with.
The very fact that a political candidate for the top governmental post in Iraq, Nouri al-Maliki, is subject to a veto by the President of the United States, what does that tell us about the autonomy of the political system in Iraq today, nearly 25 years after a war of choice was unleashed there by the U.S.?
Well, this has led to a lot of debate in Iraq, especially in the last decade, about whether they should change their system. Some are claiming changing it from a parliamentary republic to a presidential system where Iraqis vote for the head of government directly. And that way they would be able to prevent this political jockeying and allowing foreign powers to have some influence on government formation. But just to be clear, Iraq does have free and fair elections, which are rare in the Middle East. It's just when it comes to government formation, it is still susceptible to foreign influence.
That's political analyst Hamza Hoded at the Center for New American Security. You're with The World.
This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler. If you have pets, I bet you talk to them. So do shepherds and animal herders. But for the keepers of livestock, the stakes are usually higher, protecting animals from predators or dangerous weather. It requires a certain trust between man and beast. Take a listen to this. This is a Kurdish shepherd speaking to his sheep, recorded by National Geographic explorer Paul Salopek. I spoke with him recently about what we're going to call the music of animal husbandry. So, Paul, can you tell me more about what we are hearing here with this Kurdish shepherd?
Yeah, it's. I was walking across Anatolia as part of my project, and I came across shepherds. I often do. It's, you're out on foot in kind of rural landscapes. These are the human beings you meet. They have animal partners, and they're communicating to them. And this is really fascinating to me because the sounds of interspecies communication changes across the world. I think of it kind of as a medley of interspecies communication.
And we will hear a couple more examples in a second. But in this recording, I'm hearing some whistling, some hissing, some kind of throatier sounds, and some things that I recognize as words. Can we think of this as kind of a personalized language between this shepherd and his flock?
Yeah, I think to a degree, every shepherd, the ones that I've walked with across cultures, have their own kind of tics and, if you will, accents or inflections. But there is, Carolyn, what's really fascinating, there are kind of cultural linguistics that deal with animals from culture to culture, from pastoral culture to pastoral culture. So what we're hearing here might be kind of a quote-unquote Kurdish language for sheep, with this particular shepherd having his own accent. But I would hear these kind of sounds over and over in the background as I was walking through eastern Turkey.
Do you recall what he was saying in that recording we just played?
He was doing a medley for me. I said, "Man, you're beautiful." I heard him, and I walked up to him and said, "Man, you're beautiful singing and talking to your sheep." I put on my recorder and I said, "Let's hear a medley of a different thing." So he was walking in a circle, kind of moving the sheep around. They were following him, and he was, I assume, kind of giving them directions.
That's so interesting. I recall I was having a sled dog musher in Greenland demonstrate his calls for his sheep once, and we couldn't get through them because the dogs would react because he was...
they were following the instructions,
exactly,
right?
Exactly.
All getting all tangled up.
Yeah.
Yes.
So in that recording of the Kurdish shepherd, there's some throatier sounds I hear, and I wonder if that's trying to mimic the sounds that the sheep make.
Yeah, I think there's part of that, just to kind of expand it from the shepherd in Anatolia, because I walked with pastoralists who move camels, move goats, all these different kinds of animals. There are kind of onomatopoeic sounds that kind of try to mimic a little bit the sound that the animal makes, right? And so we might be hearing a bit of that. In northeastern Africa, in pastoral societies in the Horn of Africa, they have specific words like ha, ha, which is basically to warn the goats that there might be some danger nearby, a predator, right? So it is word specific.
We also have a recording of goat herds in Ethiopia that you encountered. Let's hear a bit of that. So he's whistling here. Is that a strategy to make his message carry farther?
Yeah, I think so, because this is a big desert. This is kind of the edge of the Sahel. And you can imagine the animals get scattered, right? They kind of wander away. So whistling carries. This chap was Mr. Inas. He was from a Dasanach community that kind of overlapped the borders of Kenya and Ethiopia. And he was doing the same thing, Carolyn. He was giving me kind of a vocabulary of the language that he uses with his animals, in this case, goats. And like ha was the one that I was mentioning earlier for kind of warning against jackals. He would say, whoop, whoop. You might have heard a little bit of that, which he's summoning them to water. But, to be really honest, as I was watching him do this, I didn't really see the goats change behavior too much. Maybe my eye wasn't attuned to this kind of goat language as much. They were really busy kind of hoovering up whatever sparse grass was around.
So maybe he was not the best communicator.
I don't know. It sounded pretty darn good to me, but you never know. Maybe his goats were too hungry to pay attention.
Yeah. Paul, I understand that way back in the day, you yourself worked on cow ranches in the U.S. and Mexico. Can you give me any examples of how you communicated with animals then?
Sure, happy to. And, it's a little bit of funny. Since those days when I was kind of a vaquero or cowboy, when I'm walking with animals, I try to speak the local shepherd language to them, right? So when I would get frustrated, I would sometimes break into my Mexican urging language, which is arre mula, or, arre burro, right? Which, of course, the donkey or mule from Turkey or from Kyrgyzstan did not understand.
It didn't work.
No, not very well.
So I'm curious if we were talking about mimicking the sounds that the animals make, is this kind of creating a middle ground language between human and animal?
I think it goes both ways, most definitely. Because we love our animals. Everybody does. But when your survival depends on your animal partners, you have an added incentive to kind of get inside the head and heart of your animal partners. So I think it is two-way. I really am convinced it is.
We have one more example to play here. Bedou nomads in Saudi Arabia packing their camels. And there is just one faint human-made noise at the beginning here. So there was just a little sound at the beginning, but the camel did what was expected and kneeled right down. That's very effective communication right there. It was just a 1 second sound there.
That was it. And I can repeat it for you and amplify it for you, if you will. To get them to couch or to sit down, you go. And my Saudi walking partners are probably grinning right now because my accent is off. and to get them to stand up again, you go hut, hut, hut. And so there's this wonderful, it is like a song, Carolyn. In the mornings, you have a certain kind of interaction with the animals, and you hear, your people who really know the animals, the experts, kind of singing to the animals, talking to them. And in the evening, as we're settling down to camp, a different vocabulary, and it becomes part of the ritual of moving across the world on foot.
I'm curious, Paul, you're on this walk around the world explicitly to trace the path of human migration, and keeping animals as livestock or for food was part of our evolution as a species. It's part of what allowed us to make the shift from being hunter-gatherers toward a more sedentary life. And if I'm remembering my history classes correctly, living in larger groups and larger civilizations. Did you reflect on that, this communication between humans and animals as part of our evolution as you have gone through your walk?
Very, very much so. Yeah, it's this interesting and really, I think, pretty vital transformation in human consciousness between kind of being with nature and being alone, right? In outside of nature. And I think we love our animals because we still have this limbic memory of living within nature, right? And this communication is a vital part of it. And so as I walked along, and I've written a lot about archaeology, anthropology, I'm following the footsteps of the first, hunter-gatherers in the Stone Age. I think it's really this amazing partnership that makes us bigger than who we are. Animals tend to kind of make us grow in many ways.
That's National Geographic explorer Paul Salopek. You can follow his global trek online at outofelenwalk.nationalgeographic.org.
You're listening to The World. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. A message from Iran's supreme leader posted online today said that the U.S. suffered a humiliating defeat in the war and that this moment marks a new chapter. He then added that any foreigners carrying out transgressions in the Strait of Hormuz have no place but at the bottom of its waters. The statement posted by Iran's government comes at a time when questions loom large about how much power the new leader actually has in the Islamic Republic. The World's Shirin Jafari checked into that and has this report.
Today's message marked the National Persian Gulf Day, the day that back in the 17th century, the king of Persia successfully ousted the Portuguese colonizers from Hormuz Island. The underlying theme seems to be the ouster of foreigners from Iran. But written statements are the only medium Mojtaba Khamenei has communicated with the public since he was appointed to the role in early March. Ali Waez directs the Iran project at the International Crisis Group.
We've not heard his voice. We've not seen an image of him. We've not seen a video. There is simply no sign of life.
On February 28th, the first day of the war, the US and Israel carried out a surprise attack, killing Mojtaba's father, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. They also reportedly killed Mojtaba's wife and son.
There have been some reporting about the fact that he's been injured, maybe grievously injured, that he has been under intensive medical care, and also mostly incommunicado because of security concerns.
Some reports suggest that he was disfigured in the attack and that he will need a prosthetic leg. All of that raises questions about what role he is playing in the affairs of the country. Vaez says Mojtaba was not his father's first choice to replace him, mainly because his father didn't want a hereditary system similar to that of a monarchy. But after he was killed, powerful figures within the IRGC or the military elevated Mojtaba to the position.
This is a system that came to office to topple a dynastic system, the monarchy in 1979, and has ended up becoming one.
So in a way, Mojtaba owes his position and the survival of the Islamic Republic to the Revolutionary Guards, Vaez adds. This creates a new, different kind of dynamic in the country.
I believe that he's a leader who's no longer supreme, because by definition, he's subordinate to the Revolutionary Guards, who used to be subservient to his father.
Vaez adds that the war boosted the influence of the Revolutionary Guards, making the clerical establishment subservient to them.
The war, I would say, has turned Iran from a theocracy into a military system run by a junta.
But despite the growing power of the military, the supreme leader is not completely sidelined and out of the picture. That's according to Sanam Vakil, who heads the Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House in the UK.
I think that he does weigh in on strategic decisions and red lines with regards to the nuclear negotiations or broader panoply of negotiations.
There are signs that the shift in power has created some divisions within the ranks, she says.
There is factionalism within the Iranian system. You have neoconservatives or, ultra hardliners, and then you have those that are advocating for greater flexibility.
One example of those divisions came to light in the recent negotiations between the US and Iran in Pakistan, says Arman Mahmoudian. He's a research fellow at the Global and National Security Institute in Florida. He says as talks between Iran and the US moved forward, hardliners in Iran took to their own media outlets to express discontent with the negotiations.
Those outlets are taking a very harsh language. They even at some point accuse them of staging a coup.
This kind of accusation, he says, is unprecedented. It's still too early to say what kind of role the new supreme leader will play in Iran, Mahmoudian adds. Let's not forget, he says, that it took his father some 3 decades to establish the kind of power he had towards the end of his life.
The nature of the position is going to change. A good number of the people who contributed to Khamenei's and Iran's security apparatus, they all been killed too. And that makes it very hard for Mojtaba or whoever he is after him to pick up where it left.
Questions about who is in control in Iran and the signs of divisions might lead some outside observers to conclude that the Islamic Republic has been weakened, says Sanam Vakil. That would be a mistake, she says.
Blaming infighting and factionalism in Iran for not, submitting to President Trump's terms is, I think, a misrepresentation of what's going on. And understanding the complexity of Iranian politics is really important.
The people in charge remain united, she says, at least for now. And they share one goal, to preserve the Islamic Republic and their own power. For the world, I'm Shirin Jafari.
Before we head out, good news for climbers trying to cross the ultimate item off their bucket lists. The path to the summit of Mount Everest is no longer off limits. A massive ice column had obstructed the only viable route for 19 days, keeping throngs of hopeful climbers at base camp just when they expected to be making their way up the world's highest peak.
Officials in Nepal announced on Tuesday that Sherpas had begun the work of clearing the perilous path. That column of ice was on the famous Khumbu icefall. Every year, that part of the trail has to be adjusted for glacial movement. A team of people known as icefall doctors typically do that before climbers arrive. But this particular ice formation was unusually big and unstable, so the threat of avalanche was too great to risk it.
A break in the ice appeared earlier this week and accelerated the melt, so now hikers are on their way. The crack in the ice was not the only thing that appeared this week. A team of workers made a truly unexpected discovery during that extra time at base camp.
They found a duck frozen in like a pool of ice I don't know how the duck got there. I don't know what happened. But they rescued this duck and brought it back to our camp, and they named it Tenzing.
That's Ben Ayers of Outside Online. He's been sharing video dispatches from base camp all this time, including updates on the duck.
And now, of course, for the duck update.
Duck. Update.
The duck was named after Tenzing Norgay, the Nepalese mountaineer who climbed Everest with Sir Edmund Hillary in 1953. Tenzing the duck was reportedly near death when they found him, but once he warmed up, his condition improved.
Tenzing, I'm happy to report, is eating porridge. He's feeling stronger. He's shaking his legs.
A plan has now been made for Tenzing's release. The local guide who's been caring for the animal had this to say.
I feel sad letting him go, but, he has to go where he belongs to,
He says the duck will continue to be a good omen for the climbers at Everest this year.
The World is produced by GBH and PRX, broadcasting weekdays from the Nan and Bill Harris studio in Boston. I'm Marco Werman.
And I'm Carolyn Beeler. Join us back here tomorrow.
The World is supported by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. By the Lumina Foundation, committed to a fair, universal system for learning beyond high school that offers every American the chance for a better life. LuminaFoundation.org. By the PRX Ambassador Council, whose members include Renee Vacchio-Albi, Roman Mars, the Kelson Foundation, and the Ken and Lucy Lehman family. The World's theme music is composed by Ned Porter. The World is a co-production of GBH Boston and PRX.
PRX.